Hi everyone, Happy New Year. I'm just going to warn you that this is not going to be your sexiest podcast episode. um this episode, if you're watching, I present the charts. It's not edited. It's literally live. I have very little to no notes, dates. I really just wanted to provide a general overview of 2026. If you're looking for a more detailed overview of 2026, check out my 2026 year ahead horoscopes. You basically have your own rising sign portal. So for example, if you're a Libra rising, you're going to have your own Libra rising portal. Every month is its own section where each month has your own presentation, going through the transits visually in a simple but stimulating way. And then there is so many additional supplemental material that I've sort of vetted. Some of it's my own, some of it's other astrologers, that can really support those transits and understanding what is going on with more depth if you're interested in information and learning and all of that. I also add a little bit of the human design element of it, how you can really tune into your inner authority, to know what really resonates, what doesn't, to kind of guide you through. And it's really, you get over 2 hours of material just for your rising sign, just for the presentations. And then the additional supplemental material is, endless hours. And I think I go over 60 plus transits for the year. So in this general overview, I only want to discuss what I think are the major trigger points throughout 2026 that are connected. So there's sort of these interesting points throughout 2026 that I want to talk about. In addition to, my monthlies, or if you've purchased the portal, or you want to purchase the 2026 year ahead portal that has so hours and hours and hours of information, that gives such a more detailed view month by month, that this is more of a wide perspective, how are all of these things connected? How can we we zoom in on these transits, but how can we zoom out and gain a wider perspective on what actually is transpiring? In some ways it can help. It can help when we kind of pull out and we see the bird's eye view. So, this is a general overview. It is not conclusive. I want to warn you, it's live. All of my stuff is pretty much live, but this is very, very live. I'm in the midst of holiday season. So a lot of this is just, we're going live. I did blank out the transit on the left side on my software just to prevent confusion if you're watching, so that the dates and the transit on the right, if you're watching, are the transits that I'm actually pulling up. So I just wanted to verify that. I didn't edit it out when I pull up the human design components that I go to in the general overview. So don't let that overwhelm you. But it's a pretty raw, not so edited approach, but I wanted to get this out there for you guys to provide the broad perspective as we go through the monthly horoscopes, where things get more detailed. And certainly if you purchase my 2026 year ahead portal year ahead horoscope, there is 60 plus transits presented to you that go through, plus some supplemental material that I might add more to throughout the year if I feel inspired or I feel very aligned to it. So definitely check that out. The link to purchase that year ahead portal, where it's not a guide, it's not a downloadable guide, it's literally like an online course for your 2026 year ahead horoscope. So there's a lot in there. So definitely check that out. The link is in the description below if you haven't checked that out already. Anyways, again, this is general. I'm not going over every transit. I'm not going over every eclipse. I'm just going over, I think, the major points of 2026 to really pay attention to as we move through the more detailed transits in the monthly horoscopes, etc. So anyways, let's jump in. Hi, Pisces risings. So to keep sort of this very broad perspective, going into January of 2026, I think when we get to mid-January, now if you're listening and you're not watching, I am on January 16th. However, some of you will likely feel this days leading up, days after. But I jumped to January 16th because that's when the moon enters your Capricorn 11th house of social network and long-term goals to start forming this new moon there, which I'll get to in a moment. But what I want to point out from a much broader perspective is that, yes, we have all of this in Capricorn. We have Mercury, an exalted Mars, Venus here. But I also want to point out that these personal planets, Mercury, Mars, and Venus, they're forming a closing sextile to Saturn that's been in your first house of the self and the physical body. So this is sort of when, cyclically, when we can sort of see the closing, even opportunistic ability to sort of close out the stories that have been playing out the past couple years. And I think this is really significant going into 2026 because I think that whatever's closing and simultaneously gearing up to start new going into 2026, especially in April of 2026, which I'll get to, but there's sort of this interesting energy in January of things are happening, of course, like when we zoom into these transits, but from a broader perspective, what does it mean? What does it actually mean? And I think a lot cyclically is closing out. Now, of course, closing sextile with Mercury, Venus, which it's coming off of. But I want to stick to Mars for a couple reasons. One, because Mars is exalted, sort of the honored guest here in your Capricorn 11th house of social network and long-term goals. But Mars is also forming a closing trine to Uranus in your Taurus 3rd house of communication. And lastly, I want to stick to Mars for time purposes. We all know how much I can talk. If I talked about all the other cycles, this would take forever. But Mars rules Aries, your 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. And Aries is where a lot is going to initiate in April or around April of 2026, when a lot is sort of closing out and completing cyclically in January. So with Mars ruling this area, Aries, where a lot new cycles are going to happen with planets that haven't been there in a very long time, I'm going to stick to Mars. So Mars closing sextile to Saturn. Mars rules your 2nd house of earned income and self-worth, but it also rules your Scorpio 9th house of growth and potential. So some of you could be seeing sort of like the closing cycles of what you've endured financially, what you've had to go through with self-worth, what you've had to go through with growth and potential. So knowledge, spirituality, travel, teaching, publishing, that could have been career related for some of you. That feels like it's kind of like those stories are kind of coming to a close. Mars is also forming a closing trine to Uranus. So at the same time, it's sort of like dissolving obstacles and creating flow to this last minute innovation to how you communicate and move through your everyday environment. And I think this is interesting. It's sort of like, I don't know, the second half of January, it's like things are happening, but they're also kind of closing out what needs to be closed out, what needs to be done. I also think that with the closing sextile with Mars to Saturn in your first, this could be sort of the closing to the story for some Pisces risings, or maybe the past couple of years have been you've personally been challenged mentally and physically, and you might be able to see where, okay, like I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I see where this is kind of like we're coming to a close here. Like this we're at the end of the story instead of the beginning of the story. So, I'm hoping that's the case, if that resonates for you as well. But again, a lot of what's happening in January is like the first trigger point, the first point where we can kind of see the unfolding, that I think is directly connected to what's happening in April, where so much is initiating in really, really ways some of you have never experienced before, in your Aries second house. But before we get to April, I want to talk about the eclipse on February 17th. That is a new moon solar eclipse at 28 degrees in your Aquarius 12th house of the subconscious, behind the scenes work, sleep, dreams, really sort of like the more hidden part of our chart, and thus lies. I like to think of the 12th house as a very sort of like hidden or private area. And yes, this is a new moon solar eclipse, a really powerful new beginning around maybe mental thought patterns, inner vision, dreams, behind the scenes work. And the ruler of this eclipse is Saturn. And Saturn is within 3 days of an exact conjunction with Neptune to the minute at 0 degrees of your Aries second house of earned income and self-worth. Now I want to back up here and reiterate to many of you that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees, that is a critical degree. It's a sensitive point. It's really, really important. Saturn and Neptune have been conjunct in Aries before, many, many years ago, probably around 1860, 1861. Definitely not at 0 degrees. I'm pretty sure that Saturn and Neptune have never been exactly conjunct at 0 degrees in Aries before. I might be wrong on that, but it's extreme. The point is that it's extremely rare conjunction. And the fact that Saturn is in the midst of a very rare conjunction to the point where it is pretty much exact almost by the minute. And that Saturn rules an eclipse that's happening at the same time. Pretty remarkable. I think that's something that I really wanted to point out, where, if you look at the broader perspective, you're like, wow, that's remarkable. That's so rare. Real, I mean, like, not only like once in a universe, but like once, really, like truly once in a lifetime. So with that being said, I mean, there's other things going on, but again, for time purposes, I'm trying to keep sort of like the broader perspective here with 2026 and leave the monthly horoscopes to more of the nitty-gritty details, where you could be experiencing sort of new mental thought patterns or setting intentions on working on something behind the scenes that could involve your self-worth or your finances, and how you're gearing up to maybe restructure, create new systems and patterns on your finances and or self-worth. But I think for Pisces risings, you might be thinking about it or setting the stage behind the scenes or mentally before it becomes more externalized, potentially for some of you. This, to me, things are happening for sure, but I think that this is still somehow connected to what is really gearing up to be fully initiated and new cycles starting in April of 2026. So this could be setting things up and having things unfold, but it might still feel like, the example I'm giving is like intermission. You go to a concert, you go to a show, and it's like you've seen the show, you're in it, you're experiencing it, things are happening, but there's this kind of like break in between where you're kind of in it and experiencing things, but you're still waiting for the other side. And that's kind of the analogy that I see here happening, where things are happening, but we're waiting for April, like the second part, to kind of really kick off these new cycles once and for all. So when we get to April, I'm actually going to start around April 11th, when Mars enters Aries and immediately applies to a conjunction with Neptune. Now, Mars is in rulership, so Neptune is now reporting to Mars. And I think that is a very important distinction, because in previous years, when Mars was creating new cycles with Neptune and Saturn, it was not in rulership. And so this is a very different vibe, because this is the house of Mars. And so Neptune, Saturn, the new cycles that Mars are now creating with Neptune and Saturn, they're reporting to Mars. Mars is in charge. And in previous years, Mars was not. And it was a very different feeling. So this is not only new cycles starting with the planets, but that are going to play out over the next 2.5 years with Mars cycles. But this is really in new territory. The last time Saturn was in Aries was roughly 30 years ago. Neptune takes a long time to go around. So we, once in a lifetime, maybe. So these new cycles in Aries, the point is, these new cycles in Aries with Mars haven't happened in a really long time, if not ever in our lifetime for some of us. So the point is, Mars is in charge, and Mars rules your second house of earned income and self-worth, but it also rules your Scorpio 9th house of growth and potential, which could include travel, spirituality, higher knowledge, teaching, publishing, things that could be career related regarding growth and potential. And so Mars applying to Neptune is creating a new 2.5 year cycle around maybe what you're dissolving or surrendering, around what no longer serves your cash flow, your self-worth, your growth and potential. So some of you could be completely shifting your motivations and desires around money, around growth and potential, as well as self-worth as well. So some of you might be kind of tapping into like redefining your relationship with your self-worth and how that impacts your perspective on finances, your perspective on your growth and potential. Then when we get to, I'm going to skip to April 17th, when we have this new moon at 27 degrees. But before I get into that, we have Mars applying to a conjunction with Saturn in your second house of earned income. So again, Saturn is now reporting to Mars. And in previous years, in previous Mars-Saturn cycles that have played out, Mars was not in charge. Now Mars is, and Saturn is reporting to Mars. And Saturn is not only reporting to Mars, but Saturn is in fall by essential dignity. So Saturn is in a foreign country and doesn't speak the language. So the Mars-Saturn conjunction initiating this new 2.5 year cycle to play out that could involve your growth and potential, your finances, your self-worth over the next 2 years. Mars is like, this is my country. I speak the language. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. And Saturn's like the foreign exchange student. Like I'm here to learn how to rebuild and restructure and all of that. So I think with Mars ruling your second house and your Scorpio ninth house, I think some of you might be really ready to kind of like initiate and say, feel more desire, feel more motivation regarding financial themes, growth and potential themes that might feel mentally new to you. Like mentally, it might feel new. It might feel like unexplored territory. Some of you it might feel like foreign territory regarding your long-term goals. Like you might be setting new desires and new long-term goals regarding those themes, and it might feel foreign to you. It might feel completely new. Or some of you might be setting goals on sort of connecting with social networks that are playing a part in sort of your growth and potential, your financial themes, your self-worth that feel more aligned to those things. And that might feel a little foreign to you. So there's with Saturn ruling your 11th house of social network, long-term goals, and your 12th house of subconscious thought patterns, sort of behind the scenes work, Mars is like ready to go. So in terms of like finances, self-worth, growth and potential, I think in terms of like a plan of action and what you desire and motivated, you might feel more aligned to those things. And then simultaneously, it might feel foreign to some Pisces risings, it might feel foreign with like the social network, the certain connections that you have depending on what you do, or like the long-term goals might feel really new or different to you, as well as sort of like the mental thought patterns required to initiate this new cycle might feel really new to you. So definitely be aware of like what's going on with you mentally, what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on with long-term goals and social network. That could be playing a part in this new cycle that could play out over the next 2.5 years, where a part of you might feel super aligned and really clear, and then a part of you might feel like, ooh, this is new. This is uncharted territory for me. And I normally don't talk about every full moon or new moon, but I think the new moon at 27 degrees of Aries, technically conjunct Chiron at 26 degrees, is significant just because of how many new planetary cycles are initiating in Aries, right? So it's not just Mars. Mercury's in the midst of creating a new planetary cycle here. Venus has just recently come off of creating a new planetary cycle in Aries with Neptune and Saturn. So there's been a lot of new storylines starting around this time, March, April. And then a new moon comes along, and that's just adding more layers of new beginnings, new opportunities, new ideas, new seeds being planted around this time. And because it's conjunct Chiron, it's interesting. It's sort of like, where are we releasing the old patterns, the old stories that we've been closing out the past couple months. Remember back in January when I said the closing sextiles, things are kind of coming to a close. Things are, maybe we're reminiscing or we're looking back or we're seeing what's really unfolded the past couple years. And here we are in April, really initiating all these storylines. And this new moon is conjunct Chiron, I think, saying like, are you ready to release the old stories? Are you ready to release like what happened to you or what you went through to step into the new? But when I look at the human design of this new moon with Chiron and what gate it's at, because gates can tell us a lot about the collective energy for sure. I mean, depending on your human design, you could feel this more personally, but collectively, this new moon at 27 degrees of Aries on April 17th The sun is at gate 3 and the moon is at gate 3. And gate 3 is really about, there's a lot to gate 3, but the gist of it, in my opinion, is creating more structure and innovation to move away from chaos. So some Pisces risings, you might be able to look back on the past couple years and ask yourselves, like, what areas of your life did you experience chaos? What was unstable? What was chaotic? What really didn't feel good to you? Where this new moon conjunct Chiron and these new planetary cycles creating this like new storyline to take off and take place, I think is kind of this interesting opportunity with the human design to say, like, where are the innovative solutions and new paths to release maybe those chaotic storylines or move on from them, but also create the innovative solutions and new paths that feel more foundationally supportive, that feel less chaotic, that feel more peaceful to some of you, depending on, what you've gone through in the previous years. So I think the human design element is interesting because, especially with Chiron in the mix of it, some of us might feel the fear of getting it wrong, looking messy through all this newness, or, struggling with the experimentation process with all this newness and this new moon conjunct Chiron, where we've kind of gone through sort of that closing sextile. We're closing off all the stories from the past couple of years, but at the same time, still having to maybe think about them or find innovative solutions and lessons from them to initiate these new stories, these new cycles with these planets that are going to play out over the next year or two. So again, I think this is a good time to remind ourselves that these things take time. And especially with this happening in Aries, we might feel like, I call it like the zhuzh, we might really feel fired up. We might feel really ready to go and like figure this out and want to skip certain steps. But these planets will continue moving on, opening sextile, opening square, opening trine, all of those things. So it's like these things take time. It's okay to take time. It's okay to be human. It's okay to figure it all out. And, but I think just kind of collectively, like making a collective statement when we're in that experimentation process, especially in 2026, where a lot of these transits are transits we've never experienced before, certainly not together. So there could be a lot of newness, a lot of experimentation, a lot of kind of figuring things out. And whenever we're in that process, it can put us in a state of vulnerability to judgment from others or criticism from others. And just being aware of that, where we might be sort of doing that to other people or receiving it from other people around this time in 2026, where I think we're all going to be experiencing new stuff. We all have to kind of give ourselves a little bit more grace, a little bit more space to kind of go through it. And I think with Neptune at the midpoint of Uranus and Pluto at certain points throughout 2026, I think some of us could be even stepping into more compassion and empathy towards all of us kind of experiencing one way or another a lot of things that we've never experienced before, and stepping into new paths and new ways of doing things. And I think April is a really, really hot month for that, where things are happening. And like I said, with Chiron, some of us love it, some of us hate it, some of us are going to be ready for that newness. We love newness. We love change. We love the experimentation process. And then some of us don't. So, know what type of person you are. And either way, just give yourself some space and grace and in initiating these new planetary cycles that are going to take time to play out. Jumping to July, I'm going to jump to July 18th, where, again, you could feel this. I think we're going to feel this strongly going into July. But on July 18th, that is when Uranus in your Gemini 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate will be exactly trine Pluto in your Aquarius 4th house. Your Aquarius 12th house of the subconscious, the behind the scenes, where you have limiting beliefs, dreams, visions, all the hidden stuff. And this is interesting because, again, if you're new here, I just want to get newcomers kind of on the same wavelength with some general information, where Uranus could be innovating and causing a lot of changes to home, family, property, and real estate. But through that, it could create a lot of opportunity and flow to transforming and empowering your mind, your mental thought patterns, what's going on for you behind the scenes. Or some of you might be focused on what's going on, empowering yourselves and transforming yourselves in solitude through mental thought patterns, subconscious work. And that creates flow and the dissolution of obstacles of sort of innovating your foundation by sort of exploring your vision, exploring the inner workings of your mind can help you understand what change or innovation you really need foundationally that's going to support you. And support you sort of behind closed doors, support your sleep, your solitude, your mental thought patterns, all of that. So that's just a general, extremely generalized gist of sort of the, my take on the Uranus-Pluto trine for Pisces rising. Now, the one thing I want to point out around this time that I've gotten a lot of questions on is I'm going to bump this up to July 19th, when Jupiter starts to form a pretty tight opposition. Again, you're going to feel this days leading up, the applying aspect. But Jupiter at 4 degrees in your Leo 6th house of daily work and or health routines will be in opposition to Pluto at 4 degrees in your Aquarius 12th house of the subconscious, all that behind the scenes stuff. And oppositions can be very challenging, which is why I think I've gotten a lot of questions about this. However, I think it's challenging because we can feel like we have to be at two places at once. And Jupiter in your Leo 6th house, some of you might be really wanting to focus on expanding your work, expanding your health, your routines. And that might take away or be hard to balance what you need behind the scenes, what you need for sleep, solitude, time to kind of be alone with your thoughts. So this is really, I think, the balance between your mental health versus your physical health, and also sort of your sleep and time to decompress and be alone versus your work and your routines that could be expanding. So that can be very, it can be very challenging to balance around this time. However, with oppositions, I always want to remind people to look for the additional planets in the peripheral that could be making sextiles and trines to the planets in the opposition, because those can create opportunities and flow to help balance that opposition. So I think that can sort of sometimes, like with oppositions, we can become, just what I've witnessed over the years doing this is, people can become hyper focused on the areas that the opposition is taking place in and forget to kind of take a step back and say, well, like, how do I work smarter, not harder? What connections do I have? What resources do I have? What's going on over here that can just help create natural flow to this area without me having to actually overexert myself in that area. So what do I mean by that? Well, the two players that are making sextile and trines to this Jupiter-Pluto opposition between your 6th and your 6th and your 12th are Neptune and Uranus. So I already touched on the Uranus-Pluto trine a little bit. I want to touch on Uranus in your Gemini 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate, sextile Jupiter in your 6th house of daily work and health routine. So Uranus in your Gemini 4th, this could present the opportunity to kind of take a step back and see where innovation or change to your home environment, family relationships, property real estate themes could naturally create opportunities to support and expand your health, your work, and your routines. So for some of you, you might be able to look at your home environment and say, all right, what needs to change that, or needs to innovate foundationally, that through that innovation or through that change to your foundation can naturally open up more time in your routine, or naturally open up more time to focus on your health or your work. So what is it about your home environment, where you live, relationships with your family, whatever it may be, that's not that feels destabilizing to you, that doesn't really support you? And addressing that or innovating that can naturally create that sextile or that opportunity to supporting the expansion to your routines, your health, and your work. Whereas if you became, say, for example, you became hyper fixated on, I want to expand my work, I want to expand my health, I want to expand my routines, but you're not looking at Uranus in the background saying, hey, like maybe if we just tweak a few things at home or with a living situation or relationships with people you live with or family, that can actually just naturally open up more time or more support or more expansion to those areas. Additionally, Neptune in your Aries 2nd house of earned income and self-worth will be making a trine to Jupiter. So we'll say Neptune can be a tricky planet, not gonna lie. But with the Neptune in Aries, I think this could be a time where some of you might be shifting your perspective or shifting your ideal around finances and or self-worth. And by sort of taking a step back and asking yourselves, like, what is my ideal financial situation? Even if it's not a reality at this moment, like what is, like with Neptune, you can dream a little bit, like what is your ideal? And sometimes when I ask people what their actual ideal financial situation is, it's not what they thought it was. So with Neptune, it can be like, don't let it deceive you. Don't let it make you think you want something that you don't. And by taking a step back and saying, okay, like what really is my ideal? What intuitively feels truly aligned financially and can really support me and my life and my health and my work? Because the Neptune trine Jupiter in your 6th is sort of like, once that maybe becomes clear or you have time to kind of sit with that, that can sort of dissolve the obstacles or create flow to expanding the work, the health, and the routine. So it's sort of like when you get clear on maybe where your get clear on what your ideal is financially, or get clear on where you've maybe deceived yourselves financially, that then can sort of create more clarity to flow what you actually want to expand your work, like how you actually want to expand your health, or getting clear on like, I remember when I was going through a lot of health issues with my sixth house, and having second house transits. It's like, it's this very interesting situation where once you become clear on like your desires, your ideal financially, and your self-worth, you can then take the next step on like how you want to distribute that and where you want to invest that in the work that you want to do, the health and wellness you want to do, or the vitality that you feel. And I gotta say, the Jupiter-Neptune trine, I think, can be very creative. It can be really inspiring. So some of you might find sort of like creative ways to create cash flow. Some of you, so, if you're a creative or an artist or anything like that, like some of you might be really tapping into expanding other side businesses or, stuff like that, that can sort of create more cash flow, or just kind of tapping into like what intuitively feels aligned financially. What are your innate gifts and talents? Where is your self-worth at? And sort of when you get clear on that ideal, that can then set the stage for or create more clarity for the work that you want to do, the health that you want to feel or invest in, and the routines that are going to support that. And then lastly, Neptune is going to sextile Pluto in your 12th. So again, going back to like, where is there deception? Do you deceive yourself around what you truly want financially? Where are you deceiving yourself around your self-worth? Like, where is Neptune, for some of you, creating confusion around your self-worth, your innate gifts and talents, your finances, where if you take a step back and you sort of lift that veil of illusion or confusion, and you see like, you see your value, you see what you're worth, you see, what your ideal financial picture looks like for you that really supports you. The sextile to Pluto, it's like it can create opportunities to really transforming and empowering your mental thought patterns, and vice versa. So this could also be an opportunity where some of you might be able to tap into, like, maybe you have mental thought patterns that have self-sabotaged you or limited your financial power, limited your self-worth. So some of you might be tapping into that kind of situation going on, and how that can create opportunities and flow to this opposition, by looking at finances, self-worth, looking at the foundation of your life, and where those two areas can consequently create flow and opportunity to balancing your mind, your body, your work, and sleep and solitude, and really just balancing this 6th and 12th house opposition that's going on temporarily. The last thing I want to point out around July is we have Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius, Neptune at 4 degrees of Aquarius, Uranus at 4 degrees of Aquarius, and Jupiter at 4 degrees. I'm sorry. I'm going to redo that. We have Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius, Neptune at 4 degrees of Aries, Uranus at 4 degrees of Gemini, and Jupiter at 4 degrees of Leo. It's a lot of 4 degrees going on in July and August. So if you have anything between 3 and 5 degrees in your natal chart, if you know, those natal placements will absolutely play powerful. They're going to be powerful influencers in what transpires around this time. And when we get to eclipse season the next month in August 28th, again, I'm not talking about every eclipse in this, but August 28th, we have this full moon lunar eclipse at, lo and behold, 4 degrees in your Pisces first house of the self, the physical body, how you take independent action, your appearance, how you show up in the world. And so, if you're listening and not watching, this full moon eclipse is the sun and the moon in opposition. So the moon's at 4 degrees of Pisces in your first house, and then the sun will be at 4 degrees in your Virgo 7th house of personal and or professional partnerships. So really your first and 7th house axis of you versus the other is really being illuminated and highlighted around this time. This is also angular. So this eclipses in angular houses have the ability to cause a lot of change for some of you regarding career, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment, as well as your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So Mercury is going to be involved in this eclipse because it is technically still conjunct the sun in your Virgo 7th house of personal and or professional partnerships. Now, Mercury is exalted in Virgo, but it is also still combust the sun. However, it is past its Cassini, where it was in the heart of the sun, and revived. So there are details and nuances to Mercury's combustion at the time of the full moon eclipse. But I think it's going to not only be a full moon lunar eclipse really illuminating you, but this could really sort of impact your personal and professional partnerships, including marriage, if that's applicable to you. So things could be sort of happening in this area as well, if that's a thing going on in your lives at the time. Mercury rules your Gemini 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate, where Uranus will be forming a T-square with the sun and the moon in this full moon lunar eclipse. That is very important, in my opinion, because Uranus in an air sign, especially for Pisces risings, this foundational area of your chart, receiving technically 3 squares. So receiving a square from the moon in your first, which is an eclipse moon, powerful moon, as well as receiving a square from the sun in your 7th house of personal and professional partnerships, as well as receiving a square from Mercury in the area of personal and professional partnerships. So there's a lot of pressure on Uranus to act, to change, to take action. So some of you could really be seeing something illuminating around you versus the other, and you could be seeing things either happening within your home, or you could be sort of really taking action around innovating or changing something regarding home, family, property, real estate themes. The next thing I want to talk about with this full moon lunar eclipse is that Mars in your Cancer 5th house of creativity, self-expression, children, if applicable to you, will be forming the opening square to Saturn in your 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. Now, this opening square is that first opening square that's connected back to April of 2026 when Mars was conjunct Saturn. So April, Mars joined Saturn, created a new cycle, continued on, is now at the opening square, where this is the point typically in the story where something happens. And I mean, it's eclipse season, so that's really upping the odds of things happening. But it's typically where something happens or we have the urge to take action on something or change something regarding that story. Now, Mars and Saturn, Mars rules your finances, as well as your growth and potential, and Saturn rules sort of what's going on behind the scenes for you, as well as like your long-term goals and your social network. So this could be the point where some of you are taking action to sort of change something regarding your growth and potential, your long-term goals that could involve, your children if applicable, or could involve your finances. Either way, Mars and Saturn in this opening square will both be in fall by essential dignity. So both of these planets are sort of now in foreign countries and they don't speak the language. And so whatever action is being taken, it could have a feeling or an energy of, I've never done this before, or this action or change feels really, really new to me. This feels like uncharted territory, which honestly is sort of this undercurrent theme throughout most of 2026. But I think it's important to note this opening square that I think will often be overlooked in the midst of a full moon lunar eclipse, especially for you in your first house of self. The last thing I want to mention with this full moon lunar eclipse from a broad perspective is that the ruler of this full moon lunar eclipse and you is Jupiter, and Jupiter will be forming Jupiter in your Leo 6th house of daily work and or health routines will be trine Saturn in your 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. I think this Jupiter Saturn square will be the saving grace going on in the background. Because whatever is shifting, changing, taking action on feels uncomfortable for some of us. The Jupiter-Saturn trine is constructive expansion, constructive longevity. And for you, it's between money and work, money and health. So whatever is shifting and changing, it could be in the name of creating more longevity and expansion to your work, your health, and your finances. So I do like a Jupiter-Saturn trine. And so I think this going on in the background is sort of the saving grace. I think it could have a little bit more to do with work, if work and career is still a thing in your life, Pisces rising. Just because Jupiter does rule your 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment, as well as you. So I think with it being in the 6th house of work and or health, I think, some of you, it could be heavily work related. Expanding that work to expand more of what feels fulfilling to you, your career, your business, your public recognition, and how that can create hopefully some constructive flow to your finances and or self-worth around this time. Now, how I want to close out this year is I want to jump to about November 14th. Again, you could feel this going into November. But November 14th is when Jupiter, Mars, and the South Node will all be at 25 degrees in your Leo 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So again, I don't want to get too nitty-gritty with this, but the broad perspective that I want to point out with this, especially with Mars conjunct the South Node, is that Mercury and Venus at this point in the year, by mid-November, have recently gone retrograde through your Scorpio 9th house of growth and potential, which is ruled by Mars. So again, Venus and Mercury have retrograded over a Mars-ruled area, recently gone direct, and then Mars goes over the South Node. That's a little peculiar to me because after this revisionary period over a Mars-ruled area, and for Mars to go over the South Node is sort of like Well, after this revisionary period, with Mars going over the South Node, what is Mars bringing us back to or having us release that's no longer serving us? Jupiter is also involved in the mix. And Jupiter rules you, but it also rules your 10th house of career, business, public recognition. So sort of like, what are you coming back to work-wise? Also, Mars ruling your 2nd house of earned income. So it's sort of like, what are you coming back to that brings you fulfillment? What are you coming back to career-wise? What are you coming back to maybe with finances? Or releasing that's no longer serving those themes in your life? That is initiating this long revisionary period that Mars is going to initiate in early 2027. So when I look at the human design of this on November 14th, Jupiter, Mars in the South Node at 25 degrees. On November 14th, we have the South Node at gate 29. We have Mars at gate 29 and Jupiter at gate 29. So with these players at gate 29, where they are going, both Mars and Jupiter are going to retrograde back to this 25 degree mark in 2027. So they're going to come back to this, also theoretically be at this gate 29. Now, gate 29 is a lot of things, but to just give you the gist, it has a lot to do with how we commit to a process. So I think as we're closing out 2026 and going into 2027 with a Mars retrograde, this could be about, what process are you committing to that feels completely aligned to Jupiter ruled areas and or Mars ruled areas. So what process are you gearing up to commit to, where Mars is going to let you review and revise those things in early 2027? But what process are you committing to that could involve your finances with Mars? Or your growth and potential that could be career related? What do you want to learn? Where do you want to travel, teach, publish, etc.? And or what process do you want to commit to that, again, you'll have time to review and revise in early 2027 regarding those Jupiter ruled areas, which is your physical body. Also your Sagittarius 10th house of career, business, public recognition. So I think for Pisces risings, you could be gearing up to go into 2027 reviewing and revising your core motivations, your plan of action, your desires, but ultimately with the human design element of gate 29, what process do you really want to commit to that in mid 2027, when Jupiter enters your Virgo 7th house of personal and professional partnerships, could actually be setting the stage to expand your connections with others for your business, your work, or what feels fulfilling to you. But again, Jupiter is going to retrograde back to this 25 degree territory starting January 8th, 2027, and Mars will be retrograding back to this 25 degree territory starting March 4th, 2027. So although we might be gearing up to sort of commit to a process regarding those themes that I talked about, where we might be coming back to something that we need to come back to, or maybe we're releasing something that's no longer serving us for you, maybe coming back to or releasing something that's no longer serving your finances, your self-worth, what feels fulfilling to you, your career, your business. And it's happening. This is happening in your sixth house. So ultimately, how it's ultimately going to serve your vitality, your health, the work that you want to do, and the routines that fully support all of these areas going into 2027.